Hello, I'm James Azimoha. You're watching A News. Let's see your headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran in talks with the U.S. as Tehran denies negotiations. The United Nations General Assembly adopts Ghana-backed resolution calling transatlantic slavery a crime against humanity and urging reparations. And a Turkish oil tanker has reportedly been targeted near the Bosphorus, prompting an emergency response in the Black Sea. Thank you for joining us. Conflicting signals are emerging between Washington and Tehran as Donald Trump says Iran wants a deal but is afraid to admit it. Meanwhile, Tehran says the U.S. is negotiating with itself. With no clear signs of diplomacy, tensions continue to rise.
U.S. President Donald Trump says Iran is engaged in talks with Washington, but is unwilling to admit it publicly, citing fears of internal backlash.
When I tell you we're winning so big, nobody's ever seen anything like we're doing in the Middle East with Iran. And they are negotiating, by the way, and they want to make a deal so badly, but they're afraid to say it because they figure they'll be killed by their own people. They're also afraid they'll be killed by us.
Tehran has rejected that claim. Foreign Minister of Iran, Abbas Araghchi, said there has been no negotiation or dialogue with Washington.
No negotiations have taken place so far. I state firmly that there has been no negotiation or dialogue with the American side. However, in recent days, the American side has begun sending various messages through different intermediaries, messages being conveyed through our friendly countries, and us responding by stating our positions or issuing the necessary warnings is not called negotiation or dialogue. It is simply an exchange of messages through our friends.
Araghchi says proposals reportedly described as a 15-point plan are being reviewed by Iran's leadership, but stressed there is no intention to negotiate at this stage. Sources say the plan includes limits on Iran's nuclear and missile programs. Meanwhile, Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt warned Washington is ready to escalate military action if needed, saying President Trump does not bluff. Iran's Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf warned of possible foreign attempts to seize Iranian territory, saying Tehran would respond with sustained attacks on critical infrastructure.
For more on this, our correspondent Obi Shabandar joins us from Washington with the latest developments and what they could mean for the region.
It may be the last chance to bring the ongoing conflict with Iran to an end. The Trump administration has delivered a 15-point peace plan to Tehran via Pakistani intermediaries. During a press briefing on Wednesday, White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt said that President Trump was giving the remaining elements of the Iranian government an opportunity to cooperate with Washington. Leavitt said that President Trump wants a peace deal, but if Iran fails to understand, in her words, that they have been militarily defeated, then President Trump will ensure that Iran is hit harder than they have ever been hit before. The U.S. and Israel have temporarily removed 2 senior Iranian officials from their list of officials to eliminate as the U.S. and Israel explore possible peace talks, according to U.S. officials. Iranian Parliamentary Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi have been removed from the target list for up to 5 days as President Trump opens the door to high-level negotiations that could potentially end the war. The White House believes that Iran's defense industrial base has been effectively dismantled, according to the latest briefings. On Wednesday, Admiral Brad Cooper, commander of the U.S. Central Command, said that U.S. forces are ahead of schedule in achieving their military objectives for eliminating Iran's ability to project power in a meaningful way in the region. U.S. forces have struck more than 10,000 military targets in Iran. Together with Israel, thousands of more targets have been struck, according to U.S. military officials. Iran's ability to launch drones and missile strikes has been reduced by nearly 90%, as well as 2/3 of Iran's missile and drone and naval production facilities have been either damaged or destroyed, according to the U.S. military. I'm Ube Shibander, A News, Washington.
Israeli strikes are expanding across southern Lebanon, with multiple towns hit and emergency teams responding to widespread damage. At least 20 people have been killed and dozens wounded since Wednesday, according to Lebanese authorities, with civil defense crews tackling fires in affected areas. Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz says forces aim to secure areas up to the Litani River. Hezbollah says it will fight any move to expand Israeli presence in the south, calling it an existential threat. U.S. President Donald Trump will meet Chinese President Xi Jinping in May during his first visit to China in 8 years. The trip, delayed by the war in Iran, is now set for May 14th and 15th in Beijing. Trump says he plans to host Xi in Washington later this year. The visit comes at a time of ongoing tensions between the world's two largest economies. Trade is expected to be high on the agenda, along with key issues such as Taiwan. It is still unclear whether the conflict with Iran will be resolved before the meeting.
We agreed not to replicate.
Denmark's election has delivered a fragmented result, with Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen still leading the largest party, but now facing difficult coalition talks after no bloc secured a majority. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to this day in Europe, where Denmark's election delivers a fragmented result and sets the stage for difficult coalition talks with major geopolitical implications. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen remains leader of the largest party, but her Social Democrats suffered their worst result in more than a century, winning just 38 seats and about 22% of the vote. Neither the left-wing Red Bloc nor the right-wing opposition secured a majority in the 179-seat parliament, leaving Denmark politically deadlocked. That puts former Prime Minister Lars Løkke Rasmussen and his centrist moderates in a kingmaker role, with just 14 seats but potentially decisive influence over who forms the next government. Rasmussen said, "We're in the middle. Come down and play with us. We are ready." While Frederiksen gets the first chance to try to build a coalition, negotiations are expected to be long and complex, with parties ruling out key alliances and pushing competing visions for Denmark's future. But what's at stake goes beyond domestic politics. The election reflects voter frustration over inflation, tax reforms, and welfare, and marks a sharp reversal for Frederiksen, who called the snap election hoping to capitalize on strong support after her handling of U.S. President Trump, only to see voters shift focus back to domestic issues. There is also growing geopolitical pressure, particularly around Greenland, whose pro-independence Naleraq party won a seat in the Danish parliament for the very first time. That signals rising tensions within the Danish kingdom and growing calls for a looser relationship with Copenhagen. With global powers increasingly focused on the Arctic and Greenland's strategic importance rising, even one single seat could carry outsized influence in a tightly balanced parliament. The outcome now matters far beyond who becomes prime minister. It will determine Denmark's economic direction, the stability of its political system, and potentially the future shape of the kingdom itself, as questions over Greenland's path toward independence move closer to the center of power. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Russian strikes have hit Ukraine's Kharkiv region and a key Danube port, leaving 2 people dead and damaging critical infrastructure. A woman wounded in the strike on Kharkiv has died in hospital as attacks hit 2 districts of the city, injuring 9 people. Prosecutors say a drone also struck a man in his car near the border. In southwestern Ukraine, strikes on the Danube port of Izmail damaged port facilities and energy infrastructure. Meanwhile, Russian officials say Ukrainian drone attacks killed 2 civilians in Belgorod region, while air defenses intercepted 17 drones heading towards Moscow. The U.S. has made security guarantees for Ukraine peace deal conditional on ceding Donbass to Russia, with Zelensky warning that such a move would endanger the security of both Ukraine and Europe.
Americans are ready to finalize these security guarantees at a high level once Ukraine is ready to withdraw from Donbass. In my view, the Russian side is shaping the atmosphere in its dialogue with the Americans around this very idea that Ukraine should withdraw from Donbass. The United States will then provide the security guarantees Ukraine is seeking, and Russians will certainly end this war. More or less, this is the triangle we find ourselves in. You understand that withdrawing from Donbass is wrong, immoral, and so on. But withdrawing from Donbass today also means weakening Ukraine's defensive lines. That's it. Russia always keeps one step in reserve. Take nuclear weapons, for example, something they constantly talk about threatening the entire world. Whenever there is a deadlock, at some point they send a message, what if? So tell me, why wouldn't they start the war again on new terms and tell the whole world, look, we can use the weapons we mentioned? We have no protection against that.
Ahead of the G7 ministers' meeting, France's Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot held talks with key partners near Paris. He met EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas, Saudi Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud, and Canada's Anita Anand. Discussions focused on coordination ahead of wider talks involving major economies. The meeting brings together G7 nations and the European Union, with U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio expected to join. The United Nations has taken a historic step by recognizing transatlantic slavery as, quote, the gravest crime against humanity, with Ghana leading the push for accountability and reparations. This comes despite opposition from U.S. and Europe.
The United Nations General Assembly has adopted a resolution proposed by Ghana. The resolution recognizes transatlantic slavery as the gravest crime against humanity and calls for reparations. Despite opposition from the US and European countries, the resolution was approved. In the vote, 123 countries supported the resolution. 3, including the US and Israel, voted against it, and 52 abstained. The resolution is not legally binding but carries significant political weight. Ghana has said that the effects of slavery, which saw at least 12.5 million Africans forcibly taken between the 15th and 19th centuries, are still felt today, contributing to racial inequalities. Foreign Minister Samuel Ablakwa stated that the resolution aims to ensure accountability for historical injustices. The resolution marks a new step in Africa's efforts to hold former colonial powers accountable. It follows last year's initiative by the African Union to create a unified position on reparations among its 55 member states. It calls on member states to engage in dialogue on reparations, including issuing formal apologies, returning stolen artifacts, providing financial compensation, and preventing repetition of such injustices. The resolution has faced criticism from the US and the European Union, who warned it could create a hierarchy of crimes against humanity. US Representative Dan Negrea described it as an attempt to use historical wrongs to redistribute modern resources. African and Caribbean nations are seeking to establish a special UN reparations tribunal, and Ghana believes the resolution could pave the way for such a framework.
After the break, we'll discuss what the G7 meeting could mean for the resolution of global conflicts, cooperation and reconstruction. Stay with us. Welcome back to A News. Foreign ministers from the G7 are meeting in France amid rising global tensions, with Iran and Ukraine high on the agenda. The talks also focus on reforming global governance and planning for post-conflict recovery. To help us unpack this is Vlad Olteanu, political analyst in Brussels, Belgium. Thank you for joining us, Vlad. Now, this meeting comes at a time of simultaneous crisis in Iran and Ukraine. How difficult is it for the G7 to manage multiple conflicts at once without losing strategic focus?
It is a very good question, and it is a difficult moment. You mentioned it very well. So it's an accumulation of crises. G7 is, of course, mainly an economic decision body. It's a collegial decision body in between the seven high economies of the world. It had to deal with many crises all over from 2020 already. So even before Ukraine, we had, of course, the COVID crisis, we had the post-COVID recovery, we had Ukraine 2022, and now we have Iran and the Iranian conflict. Number two, there was the war of 12 days, but now this is a more significant war situation. And the impact of all those crises is a very heartfelt economic impact. We had high inflation in the euro and US zones, so in the dollar and euros in 2021, 2022. And now, because of high energy prices, we face a very difficult economic situation and probably high inflation as well coming our way. So it's a difficult moment, and you are very right to bring in that question the multiple crises sum definition. It's not just one crisis, it's multiple crises summing up together.
Now, there are clear differences between the United States and its European allies over the Iran conflict. How serious are these divisions, and do they limit the G7's effectiveness?
The divergences in the views in between the United States and the European Union member states and the European Union itself are significant. That is very clear. How much will the G7 be limited by them? That is a different question. I think the G7 has to find a resolution in economic terms. Will probably go beyond economic terms, will try to find a solution or a number of options, if not a solution, to basically end up with a peaceful situation. A peaceful situation is a prerequisite for economic normality. Because without a peaceful situation, the energy prices can remain high for quite some time. And if the energy prices are high for a longer time, longer than a few weeks, I would say, or a few months at most, then of course the economic situation is going to be very tense for the United States, for the European member states, or for the European Union member states, but also for other places and regions in the world. I'm looking at the image that you are putting on, and you see in that image, of course, Brazil, you see in that image Canada, you see in that image India, you see South Korea, you see Japan. For all those areas, a high energy prices zone or period will result in significant inflation and significant pressures on their respective economies.
Now, you touched upon the significance of energy crisis. With the Strait of Hormuz effectively disrupted, global energy markets are under pressure. How central is energy security to the discussions taking place here?
Oh, it's absolutely central. I think if there is one element that cannot be ignored, it's energy prices. It's in the center of everything. It's in the center of economic stability, of financial stability. Many of the economies I mentioned do not have the fiscal capability to actually increase margins and compensate for high energy prices. So clearly that is in the center of everything. Probably the G7 will also look at other methods of cooperation. So clearly at the central bank system cooperation, clearly at general economic cooperation. But energy remains clearly central, and finding a solution to high energy prices is paramount to any other discussion probably that the G7 leaders may have.
Now, France has invited countries like India and Brazil to participate. Some critics argue that the G7 is perhaps losing relevance in a more multipolar world. Does this meeting challenge that perception or reinforce it?
I do think it actually challenges the meeting challenges that perception in the way that G7 is just a number, and what France has done, I think, shows clearly that this can be G7 plus, and it can be later on G9, G10, G whatever. We will also have G20, by the way. So this is just a number. I do think that what is most important is that the economies of the world, be them the top 7 or the top 20, do continue the dialogue and do continue further integration. I think this is good for the world and this is good for all the participants. Of course, there could be another country invited to the group, which is Russia, but as we know, after 2022, Russia was basically pulled off of the group and is not invited. But otherwise, definitely in that group, everybody which is a strong economy in the world could and should be invited. So France's gesture towards Brazil and India, I think it's so going towards the BRICS, the so-called BRICS, is actually a very, very good step in the right direction.
Now, there's also a focus on post-conflict reconstruction in Iran and Ukraine. Are these discussions premature, given that conflicts like Ukraine, as I mentioned, are still ongoing?
It is true that both conflicts are ongoing, Ukraine for a number of years now, Iran for a number of weeks, but with very significant consequences, as we see. I do think that actually at the end of the day, it is important indeed that those discussions do happen even during the conflict period. Why? Because you need to be able as G7 to provide economic assistance and reconstruction and resilience capacity as of day one, once those conflicts would be finalized, will be stopped, and basically once peace can start. Because both Ukraine and actually not just Iran, but in that case, probably Iran with a new regime, with a new political regime, but not just Iran, but also the countries around Iran would need a sustained support just to be able to come back to normal and just to be able to provide an economic outcome which is positive for the world. Even very rich countries around Iran, and I'm talking there about, of course, the energy-rich countries, which are net exporters of hydrocarbons, oil and gas, particularly, they would need help in terms of rebuilding capacity after this war. If we look at Ukraine, Ukraine will need significant help, and the European Union is already providing quite a lot of financial support, but it will need significant help to be able to actually go beyond the war into a peaceful economic growth situation. So it is very, very important to discuss that now and to be ready as of day one with economic support and economic intervention.
Now, speaking about sustained resources, as you mentioned, despite the Iran war, G7 leaders insist on support for Ukraine. Is there a risk that attention and resources are being stretched too thin?
Yes, I mean, it is a very good question as well. I mean, yes, it could be that the resources will be stretched too thin. But in this situation in which we find ourselves now, it is very clear that the world needs to be able to put up with both. So in other words, it needs to assist a very fast and very resilient transition of the markets around Iran to bring back energy to the world, to bring back and to bring down the prices of energy as a result. And that needs to be done as fast as possible. And at the same time, in Ukraine, of course, the world would need to also help Ukraine come up after this conflict. And of course, by the world, the sum of the countries who will contribute is a bit different. Probably in the Ukraine case, the European Union is going to play a significant role, a significant economic help role and assistance role. Probably in the case of the countries around Iran, it's more than the European Union, for sure. It's clearly the G7 fuller mandate, let's put it this way. But in any event, the world needs to address both of them. One cannot and should not be addressed without the other, because they are actually very important for different reasons, but very important both.
Now, and finally, at the end of this meeting, in your opinion, what would count as a meaningful outcome given the scale of the crises being discussed?
Probably a meaningful outcome will include a number of measures and a set of measures in both cases. And a meaningful outcome will include probably options on how to end the Iranian situation. For the Ukraine, there are a number of options on the table already. They were discussed previously. For Iran, of course, that is new, critical. And having solutions and having options to go out of this conflict and find a peaceful resolution, a peaceful, stable resolution in the post-conflict strategy are actually key. So I think those elements would be meaningful and would mean that the meeting actually proved to be successful indeed.
Well, thank you very much for your time and insight, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Now, after the break, we'll take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. A News is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on A News.
Welcome back to A News. Speaking at the Bao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2026, Azerbaijan's parliamentary speaker Sahiba Jafarova said China is playing a key role in global affairs as Baku moves to deepen ties with Beijing. She highlighted Azerbaijan's growing role as a transport hub and its contribution to the Belt and Road Initiative. Jafarova also stressed the importance of the Middle Corridor as a secure route linking Europe to Asia. The forum is being held in southern China from March 24th to 27th. Founded in 2001, it brings together leaders and experts to promote regional economic cooperation and development. At the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference 2026, China's top legislator Zhao Leji met officials from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan to boost cooperation. Our Makdum Magdum has more.
China's top legislator Zhao Leji has met with visiting officials from Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan, along with members of the Boao Forum for Asia Board of Directors, on the sidelines of the Boao Forum for Asia Annual Conference in Hainan. The meeting focused on strengthening political trust and expanding cooperation amid a shifting global dynamics. During talks with Azerbaijan's parliamentary speaker Sahiba Gafarova and Kazakhstan First Deputy Prime Minister Roman Skaler, Zhao emphasized advancing high-quality Belt and Road cooperation, boosting trade and investment, and deepening legislative and people-to-people exchanges. Both sides also reaffirmed support for closer bilateral ties, with discussions highlighting collaboration in sectors including energy, infrastructure, and economic development. Zhao also held discussions with BFA board members led by Chairman Ban Ki-moon, showing China's support for multilateralism and the forum's role as a platform for international dialogue. Participants expressed readiness to strengthen coordination, promote openness and inclusiveness, and contribute to global cooperation through the continued development of the Boao Forum for Asia. Mani Makdum, A-News, Beijing.
The Turkish-owned oil tanker has come under attack in the Black Sea, just off the entrance to the Bosphorus Strait. Officials say the vessel was targeted by both aerial and surface drones, prompting an emergency response. And Istanbul correspondent Adem Moro has more.
A crude oil tanker owned by an Istanbul-based Turkish firm was attacked early Thursday roughly 22 kilometers off the Bosporus Strait, Turkey's transport ministry has confirmed. According to a ministry statement, the incident was likely related to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The tanker, named the Altura, which reportedly belongs to the Pergamon Shipping Company, had departed from Russia before the incident. Officials say the vessel left the Russian Black Sea port of Novorossiysk and was reportedly carrying around 140,000 tons of crude oil. The attack is believed to have occurred at approximately 12:30 a.m. local time. According to reports, the ship was targeted by both an aerial drone and an unmanned surface vessel. Damage was reported on the ship's upper section and in its engine room, prompting the Altura to issue a distress call. A nearby vessel, identified as the Erdek, later approached the targeted ship to assist. No deaths or injuries have been reported among the Altura's crew. Turkish rescue vessels have since been dispatched to the area to provide assistance and assess the damage. It still remains unclear who carried out the attack. But last October, the Altura was added to the European Union's official list of sanctioned vessels. Since then, Switzerland, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom have also added the ship to their respective sanctions lists. Notably, the targeted vessel was earlier classified by maritime tracking services as part of Russia's so-called shadow fleet. Moscow, for its part, has yet to issue a statement regarding the incident. This is Adem Moro for A-News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Russia has dispatched more than 300 tons of humanitarian aid to Iran, with Azerbaijan serving as a key transit route. The shipment consists mainly of medical supplies. The delivery comes after Tehran requested assistance following damage to hospitals and medical infrastructure.
Russia has dispatched over 300 tons of humanitarian aid to Iran, with the shipment transiting through Azerbaijan. The shipment, primarily consisting of medical supplies, arrived by cargo train from the Russian Ministry of Emergency Situations at Garadagh station of Azerbaijani Railways. It will subsequently be transported by Iranian trucks to the relevant authorities in Iran for distribution. According to Russia's Foreign Ministry, Tehran earlier requested medical assistance after hospitals and ambulance stations were damaged in recent strikes, leaving many civilians injured. This shipment follows an earlier delivery on 12th of March, when Russia's Ministry of Emergency Situations sent more than 13 tons of medicine and medical supplies to Iran via Azerbaijan. The operation underscores Azerbaijan's role as a key transit route, facilitating the efficient transfer of humanitarian aid.
Armenia has approved a multi-sector budget support agreement with the European Commission, securing 143 million euros through the 2022 to 2029. The package includes 90 million euros in direct budget support and 53 million euros in technical assistance. The funding is aimed at strengthening public finance management and boosting institutionalization capacity. It will also support export diversification, visa liberalization talks, and reforms linked to the rule of law. Georgia's Prime Minister, Irakli Kobakidze, says the country will not impose sanctions on Russia, but insists it will also not allow them to be bypassed through its territory. His comments come as tensions with the European Union continue over Tbilisi's stance on sanctions. Anni Nikolashvili has more.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze says the government is following a clear and principled policy on Russia-related sanctions, refusing to impose them but also not allowing them to be bypassed through Georgian territory. He emphasized that this approach is guided by national interests, noting that imposing sanctions could have significant economic consequences for Georgian citizens, including farmers and exporters. At the same time, he stressed that authorities strictly monitor trade and logistics to prevent any violations of international restrictions. His remarks come against the backdrop of growing tension with the European Union, which has adopted multiple rounds of sanctions against Russia since the start of the war in Ukraine. The issue gained renewed attention in recent weeks as the European Union prepared its 20th sanctions package. For the first time, the proposal included measures targeting infrastructure in third countries, among them Georgia's Black Sea Olavi oil terminal. The draft would have restricted EU companies and individuals from engaging in transactions with the port amid concerns over potential links to Russian oil transport. Georgian authorities strongly rejected these concerns. Kobakidze stated that allegations of sanctions circumvention are unfounded and that Georgia has acted responsibly throughout the process. He added that the government provided assurances to European partners that sanctioned vessels would not be serviced in Georgian ports. Kobakidze has criticized what he describes as double standards from European institutions, arguing that while Georgia faces pressure to impose sanctions, trade between EU countries and Russia continues at significant levels. Following those developments and consultations, the European Union ultimately did not include the Olavi oil terminal in the final version of the 20th sanctions package. However, monitoring of compliance is expected to continue. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Kazakhstan says it is ready to deepen energy cooperation with the United States by expanding export routes across the Caspian Sea and boosting investment. Kazakhstan's energy minister made the remarks during talks with U.S. Energy Secretary Chris Wright on the sidelines of CERA Week in Houston. Both spoke on energy security, alternative corridors, and the Caspian region's role in global supply chains. U.S. investment in Kazakhstan's energy sector has now exceeded $60 billion, with major projects involving ExxonMobil and Chevron. An international group of travelers has begun a two-day visit in Karabakh and eastern Zangezur. The delegation, the largest so far, brings together participants from 37 countries and is touring key locations across the region.
Starting today, an international group of travelers is visiting Karabakh and eastern Zangezur, marking the latest in a series of organized trips to the region. Over the two-day trip, the group plans to travel by road along the Agdam, Shusha, Khankendi, Lachin, Zengilan, Fizuli route. This visit is of particular importance in promoting the formerly occupied territories within the framework of black tourism, while also showcasing the large-scale reconstruction and restoration work underway. The group is led by Harry Mercedes, founder of Nomadmania Club and a Greek-born UK citizen, and includes 79 participants from 37 countries, making it the largest international travel group to visit the region to date.
This is my it's my fourth time in Agdam. I think it's very interesting to see how things have changed. So we first came in 2021 and there was nothing here. It was only ruins, we could barely drive, there were bad roads. There was still this ruin with the mosaic that was here and the mosque in a bad state. And then we came again in early 22 and then I came again last year. But what's interesting, even compared to last year, so within 1 year I see all these new buildings here, and I was just told that 150 families have come back to the place where they used to call home. So, I mean, I think this is unbelievable how there has been a plan for reconstruction and it looks like this plan is being followed. The speed of it is very impressive.
It's a history. I like the traditions, I like the culture. I think it's the history which attracted me here. And, you know, I knew a little bit about Azerbaijan, but I didn't know all the history and the background of Kasbah. So it was very interesting to learn all this.
I think the main difference between Karabakh and other places that are considered to be black tourist places is that Karabakh has a whole new level of potential in that, you know, it has a dedicated government that is interested in making this place habitable again, in making this place, you know, livable again. And, you know, other places that are considered black tourist locations, usually some sort of natural disaster or war has happened, and there isn't really any effort to, you know, regenerate it, to make people be able to live there again. And that is the biggest difference between those places and Karabakh. Karabakh obviously saw a lot of conflict in recent years, but right now it is trending upwards, it is coming back, and people are soon going to be able to live here again.
Este foarte important să înțelegem cum funcționează lucrurile, cum funcționează lumea în care
trăim. It is very important to understand how things work, how the world we live in functions, because it is a shared world, a world we all live in together. It no longer matters whether conflicts are near our borders or far away, because everything ultimately affects everyone. What is important, however, is that at some point we accept things as they are. We cannot go on indefinitely trying to change everything around us. At some point, one side has to make a compromise, and the other side must also be willing to accept a compromise.
Nomadmania ranks global travel by dividing the world into 1,301 regions. Mid-Cities has visited all of them and more, and currently holds the #1 position worldwide. Between 2020 and 2025, 15 such international visits have been organized to Karabakh and Eastern Zengezur through major global traveler clubs. This latest trip marks the 16th. I am Ayten Şükürova with Ilke Mehdiyev from Agdam, A-News.
Now to Afghanistan, where regional cooperation on water management was highlighted at a major ministerial forum in Central Asia. Officials emphasized fair water distribution and joint action on climate change challenges. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has the details.
Afghanistan's Ministry of Water and Energy says Deputy Minister for Water Mujibur Rahman Umar Akhundzada addressed the main ministerial level Water Week Forum in Tashkent, Uzbekistan on behalf of Afghanistan. In his meeting, he stressed the importance of fair water distribution between Afghanistan and Central Asian countries, strengthening water diplomacy and adopting modern technologies for improved water management. He also underlined the need for joint regional cooperation to address the impacts of climate change, particularly on shared water resources. The Deputy Minister spoke about preventing the degradation of the banks of the Amu River, noting that Afghanistan remains committed to respecting the water rights of neighboring countries. On the sideline of the forum, Akhundzada met with Uzbekistan's Minister of Water, Shavkat Kamrayev, where the two sides discussed expanding bilateral cooperation in the water sector. Officials say Afghanistan's participation in the forum is considered an important step toward strengthening the country's active role in regional and international discussions, while opening a new chapter for cooperation on water management and shared environmental challenges. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A-News.
Now, after the break, we'll discuss how attacks on a Turkish-operated oil tanker carrying Russian crude oil could impact global shipping and regional security. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. A Turkish-operated oil tanker carrying Russian crude oil has been struck near the Bosphorus, one of the world's most critical shipping routes. The incident highlights growing risks to maritime security in the Black Sea. To help us unpack this, we're joined by Melih Demirtaş, former diplomat and political analyst from Ankara, Turkey. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Demirtaş. Now, how serious is this attack on a tanker carrying around 1 million barrels of oil in terms of global energy security?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Azimah. It is definitely critical for security calculations, for actors like Turkey, who really struggles to find some middle roads, who really struggles to find a real diplomacy between these actors. I mean, both Ukraine, Russia, both Iran, Israel, and United States. As you know, we have a region which we cannot escape. I think we do not want to escape, of course. We only want a real diplomatic realm. But actually, the crisis always found us. I always remember this historical crisis since the Second World War. And also today, I think nothing changed. And some actors actually planned something, and they really having some important influences also in our region. Just as you said, 20 kilometers to our shores, to our territory, I think an important ship with 1 million barrel of oil, I think it will be used, I suppose, for civilian purposes. And it's also for energy infrastructures, energy security. It is so important for world economy, not only our region, but for world economy. And really very shocking attack from a side. We do not know still which sides, but actually these sides, I mean, both Russian and Ukrainians are really skillful. We all know that since, of course, 2022, in using such weaponry, I mean, drones, unmanned vehicles, which are really so dangerous against some civilian, of course, targets. Also, Israeli usage in Middle East, we already know that. It really destructed many civilian and also energy infrastructures. And now, our economy is also Turkish economy, is also regional economy, of course, will be affected from such an important, maybe, and dangerous and heinous, maybe, attacks, which really targets this civilian and also energy infrastructure. And I think our energy minister, I mean, also our transportation minister, already made important declaration that it will maybe, of course, investigated. And maybe some official sources will make some important announcements, I think, in the coming hours.
Now, this incident happened close to one of the world's busiest maritime corridors. What makes the Bosphorus such a critical choke point for global trade?
If you think this geopolitics, Mr. Azimah, from, of course, Black Sea to the, of course, Mediterranean, I think we had an important passage, which is Istanbul Strait, which is Çanakkale, and then you passage just through this Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean. This famous, of course, Russian, we all know that political purposes, or of course, trade purposes. From the historical realm, we already know that from its shores, I mean, the southern shores of the Russian, of course, fleets, they already always used this passage for its economic purposes. But after the outbreak of this Russian-Ukrainian war, we already know that Ukraine also wants to demand, of course, its legitimate rights. It is, of course, a legitimate war for its territory. But still, we do not know that how it can maybe affect or real civilian passage, which is Istanbul, I mean, and Çanakkale passages. And this can really bind these roads from, of course, Ukrainian, also Romanian, Bulgarian, and many countries which are having some shores to Black Sea, have this legal and legitimate rights for safe passages, for trades and for civilian passages. And now, just 2 and 3 days ago, we have an important conference for this Black Sea security. And just, a couple of days after, we see such an attack. How can we explain such an attack? We do not know still. Of course, there are not so many official declarations still. But of course, we have some guesses. Unfortunately, I already seen that some Ukrainian, of course, drones are, of course, attacking some ships which are coming from Russian, of course, shores, which are maybe transporting this Russian oil to other maybe ports. And I'm sorry to tell that, because we always, of course, support this Ukrainian legitimate, of course, struggle. But now we already seen that such Ukrainian maybe planned attacks can really make also other actors like Russia, like Iran, or some other actors like Israel much more violent, much more aggressive for another war. I mean, in the Middle East, in Eurasia, and Turkey will be, remain always neutral and guarantor of this diplomacy. I suppose so.
Mr. Demirtas, there's been no immediate claim of responsibility, as you rightly mentioned. How does this uncertainty complicate the risk of escalation in the region?
I also looked before the program, yes, to all the official sources. This time, from a Ukrainian, Russian, or of course, foreign ministry. It is, I think, investigated. Some official, maybe also from intelligence services, maybe. There is a coordination, I suppose so, with all this maybe counterparts, of course, Turkish intelligence, Turkish foreign ministry. And I really want to say that it will be not uncalculated move, because if it is uncalculated, if it is an accidental move, then we can say, yes, these drones, this unmanned weaponry has such risks, Mr. Azimova, because just 2 days ago, I think we have also an unmanned sea drone, sea kamikaze drone, which are really is also very also dangerous to some civilian ships or infrastructure. And after that date, I think just yesterday night, we see this air drone, which is kamikaze drone again, targeted this ship. It's a very big ship also. But we must wait and we must see, and we must also think that between Ukraine and Russia, we are really the middle road. Think about our diplomatic struggle, which is really an Istanbul spirit. We always think about between these two actors, Russia and Ukraine. And now, to keep this Istanbul spirit, to keep this diplomatic spirit, especially in this very violent atmosphere in Palestine, in Lebanon, in Iran, still in the Middle East, we must be really careful. Both Ukrainian side and also, of course, Russian side, they must be careful, and also they must really keep this dialogue with Russian and also with Turkish counterparts.
Now, Turkey has warned both Russia and Ukraine about conducting attacks near its waters. How difficult is Ankara's position in trying to balance security on one hand and diplomacy on the other hand?
Definitely, it's one of the most difficult, maybe, diplomacy making in the world nowadays, I think, Mr. Azimova, because there are always camps, there are always some very different poles in our geography. Think about this First World War, Second World War, Cold War. I think nothing changed. It always repeats somehow with different segments, with different perspectives also. Think about nowadays this Iranian war. Some important, of course, allies, which are United States, Israel, some, I think, European powers, also Ukraine, we must count in this block, because already Mr. Zelensky had said many times that he wants to support this, Middle Eastern countries against Iran. And in another poll, in another segment, we see, of course, Russia, Iran, although it is not declared officially, it is an alliance, but still, if you look at, of course, Russian statements in this Iranian war, we can see that there's another segment of this world politics. And in between, we see, of course, Turkey and Turkish diplomacy. We already said that we are really against these heinous attacks of Israeli and, of course, United States alliance against this, of course, starting from Palestine, Lebanon, and now Iran. And but that doesn't mean that we are not supporting, of course, legitimate Ukrainian territorial rights against this Russian, of course, 4-year attacks to Ukrainian territory. In between, we always staying this defenders of this diplomacy. But still, unfortunately, maybe our Ukrainian friends will accept that, but they are also making some important maybe alliances with some Israeli intelligence services, with United States, of course, intelligence, and against maybe Russia, Iranian bloc. They want maybe have some, I don't know, programs or organizations against, of course, Turkish maybe interest, and it directly affect, unfortunately, sometimes our energy or civilian infrastructures. And it is the same truth for the Russian side. 2-3 years ago, we have same kind of attacks from maybe Russian intelligence services. So we are in between, and we are really in difficult position, Mr. Azimova. But still, as a real skillful diplomacy, Turkey really strives and struggles its best.
Mr. Demetrius, we've unfortunately run out of time. Thank you very much for sharing your time and insights with us.
Mr. Asamoah, thank you. Thank you.
Well, that's all we have for now. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to A News.